Good evening, Canes fans, and welcome to the 11th episode of the Rod the Podcast, conveniently titled The Jingle, which I think you guys will all enjoy a little later. My name is Jordan Betts, and I'll be your host as always. And of course, I am joined by my co-host, Mike May. How are we doing tonight, Mike?
We're doing great. Jordan Betts is the best, if anybody was wondering.
A few outtakes before the beginning where I literally forgot my own name. But that's a little awkward, and we'll move past it expeditiously because I don't want to talk about it anymore. So tonight, obviously, we're going to spend a little time talking about the Kotkaniemi offer sheet. And as we predicted, he is now a member of the Carolina Hurricanes, as the Montreal Canadiens did not match late Saturday afternoon. Mike, I know you shared your thoughts last week. Has your perception of the move, the offer sheet, and the subsequent non-matching by Montreal have things shifted in the past 5 or 6 days?
No, it was what we expected to happen. It was the logical path, and you look at it, and obviously the point of a real offer sheet, if you're actually trying to get the player instead of just put an organization into a crappy situation, is to offer a contract that's overvalued. And the Canes did that. We obviously offered Kotkaniemi more than he was worth on a 1 year, understanding that gave you the best opportunity to get the player.
Yeah, as we said last week, not to take a victory lap, and kind of came to fruition just how we predicted, but it just makes a ton of sense. And I don't subscribe to the, you're seeing a lot of discourse in Montreal and in other non-Carolina markets that, oh, haha, the Canes traded their Calder finalist goalie. They didn't sign their top 5 defensemen in the league, all to overpay and give draft assets for this young, proven commodity that, although he was highly drafted, has been pretty bad. And it's like, these things don't really exist in a vacuum, because when you view it that way, you don't talk about how the Canes brought in, and forget the off the ice stuff, how they brought in D'Angelo to replace the on ice production of Dougie Hamilton. And it's very plausible. It doesn't talk about how you brought in 2 proven goalies in Frederik Andersen and Antti Ranta to solidify the goalie position. And hey, like with Ned, they had him for 5 years. Like they felt like they knew what he was, and they're not going to overvalue 25-30 games of elite performance. So like I said, these things don't exist in a vacuum. The Canes saw this as an opportunity to acquire a highly drafted, skilled center, and I know Don Waddell said he'll start in the left wing, just as kind of we talked about last week, which makes too much sense, but it's a great move for the long-term health of the franchise, I believe, because I categorize it as adding another core member after you lost Dougie. I think the real question for me now, and it stems back to some previous comments Don Waddell had made after the Nedeljkovic trade. He said this is a win-now team, a team that's trying to win the Stanley Cup. Is bringing in KK a win-now move, Mike?
You can look at it 2 ways. There's option A, where he comes to Carolina, he gets all the bad juju off his back from being mishandled in terms of development to being in a fan base that is ultra aggressive and hockey crazed, in a sense where it can be overbearing. And even though they're hockey crazed, it doesn't necessarily mean they're hockey intelligent. Just because you have a sport there for a long time and you can be entitled to whatever you want to say, it doesn't necessarily mean the backlash is intelligent.
The most popular team in the NFL is the Dallas Cowboys. That's what I'll say there. Yep.
That's all you need to know. So it's a change of scenery. He gets to come and play with fellow countrymen that have had success here. There is a legitimate chance that he takes a step next year and becomes a second line left winger. If that happens, then it's absolutely a win now and win later move. And I'm saying this because there's a good chance that he still needs a lot of development. So there's a really strong possibility that option 2 is what it is, where he's a guy that is going to play third line minutes All right. He strengthens your top 9. He doesn't make you amazingly better. I think he's better. He makes your team better from the jump. Does it make you Stanley Cup better alone? Probably not if he's at where I think he's at. He's going to need a little more time. And we'll see. It's tough to tell right now because we're going to have to see how much work he actually needs.
Yeah, I think we're both of the belief that Carolina will do things, at least they'll do things the right way and allow him to play with equally talented, like-minded people that maybe see the game the way he does, which can unlock some of that offensive upside. I think we're going to get into the development portion of this in Turtleneck Time a little later. But I think the thing that I really want to focus on as far as it pertains to KK in this season alone, just focusing on where we're at. And I agree with you. I don't think this makes them a better team on paper right now. That doesn't make it a bad move. And I know something that you've stressed is this doesn't mean they're done. I think we both probably think they're done until at least, they get into the season. But you have time to change your roster really until the trade deadline. And even after that, you can make, some, waiver moves and things of that nature. But we have a long window here to see how this team is going to look on the ice. An interesting comment that Dom Waddell made in his post offer sheet press conference was that the team felt that they were a top 9 forward away.
Correct. Yeah.
To me, I know you agree, we both felt they were a top 6 forward away. And that's where like a Vladimir Tarasenko, injuries aside, comes to mind. We thought about, we played the numbers and, prayed for maybe a Jack Eichel. That was never going to happen. I don't think Kotkaniemi is the, he's getting paid 6.1. We all know that's an overpay. He's not supposed to be a 6.1 player, $1 million player, and he's not a savior. I think he's a guy that's going to be defensively responsible. He's not going to hurt you on that end. I just think for this move to make sense for a win now team, he's got to produce as a second line winger before the end of the year. By the time they get to the playoffs, he's got to be firing on all cylinders. And I think really the only way to get that to happen is to play him with high-skilled guys. I'd like him most on a second line with a Trocheck and an H's, but I'm of the belief that he'll probably start in a defensive-minded role with Stahl and Fost on the third line and maybe work his way into the second unit.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of line shuffling because there's just a lot of new faces for Rod to work with. When I think about the whole win now idea, you also have to take into account what is the organization's idea of win now. Do they actually mean that they think they're a Stanley Cup winning team now, or do they think they're a team that is going to get far in the playoffs but they're not at Stanley Cup mode yet? If you were to ask, and it's tough because at the end of the day, there's a handful of teams that have the opportunity to win a cup. Carolina, for the last year, now we'll see this year, was a team that had a chance to win a cup, but then you watch what happened last year, and they were close to Tampa Bay.
Sure, but there was still a clear gap.
There's a gap there.
Yeah,
So.
As something we've gone in depth before, especially in that episode where we broke down the organizational philosophy. I question that as well because I think my belief is that they believe win now is just getting to the playoffs. Obviously, with the Svetch signing, they have cap space. I mean, a beautiful cap situation moving forward with the majority of their core outside of Natchez really locked up, for the foreseeable future. I think they are okay with just getting to the dance because I believe at that point, as analytically driven as they are, they understand that the margin becomes smaller, and on a smaller sample size, the analytical advantages that you can, garner over an 82-game season are less and therefore more unpredictable. I think they just want to get there and see, consistently being in position to, have an opportunity to chase the cup. I think you've made the point previously that their moves at the trade deadline are going to indicate if they believe in being a Stanley Cup contender. And that's where I push back on it, because I felt this year as the Central Division champion, it should have been a go-in for a year. In a weird year where you had the opportunity, the playoffs weren't the same. And for them, that actually meant it was tougher because they ran into Tampa in the second round. But I thought it was a year there you could have pushed your chips to the table, because Dougie Hamilton was in essence your trade deadline addition, right? Because he was your trade because you didn't move him out. I think they're content. I think they believe they're in a good spot. I believe they're in a better spot than they were before the offer sheet. It's a super solid unit. I'm just not sure they've done anything to move themselves back away from the periphery contenders into that top group where I believe Tampa, Vegas, and Colorado exist.
Yeah, so when I look at the roster and think about it, I see a team that I think is ultra deep. They have a great top line. It's not one of the best in the league, but it's great. It's definitely top 10, one of the first lines in the league, in my opinion, being Svech, Aho, and Turbo, right? And then you look at it and you really are running a solid second line, and you almost have a 2A and a 2B at this point in some fashion. And then honestly, your fourth line could be a lot of teams' third lines probably. So they have forward depth. I like the pairings that could be available defensively, and we'll talk about that more later. And we're just going to have to see what we can get out of the goalies. It's a lot of question marks. The organization seems super keen on a lot of these people, so they've put their trust in them. I don't think there's many second choices in here. I think when you look at the roster, I don't really see a lot of guys that they're like, we had to settle for that, right? I think if anybody, maybe Kotkaniemi is the guy you maybe settled on. With that being said, he's a 21-year-old player who still has a potential to develop into a better player. It's not like you're getting a reclamation project at age 25 or 26, right? You're getting it at 21, which makes it more manageable. And maybe you didn't get Brandon Saad. Maybe you didn't get Tarasenko, and I don't think that saga's over yet. I think Tarasenko is going to be moved closer to the trade deadline because he's going to have to come back, show he's healthy, play well for him to ultimately be traded. So
sure,
there's a lot of options on the table. Like you mentioned, we'll see what they do with their trade deadline moves. But the reality is you don't really want to shake up the first line. The second line looks really solid. So if you're adding, like you and I have talked about the whole time, I don't really think it makes sense to add anywhere outside of that second line.
Yeah, and before we jump into the next segment, because I think you kind of set us up perfectly to do so by talking about a few things. KK's development, and I think we need to go through, and I know we did it last week, but I think it's a valuable exercise to once again kind of talk through where we see, especially the forward lines. And from this point, I think it's time to go to Turtleneck Time. I alluded to it earlier. We have a special jingle produced by our outstanding producer, Steven. Let it rip, buddy.
The best time to be the Canes GM is all the time. One with a collar, turtleneck, what's on his mind? It's Turtleneck Time.
That is unbelievable.
Oh my God, that makes me cry every time
he
I hear it.
produced that for us a few weeks ago, and we've just been sitting on it waiting for our next Turtleneck Time, and we just died laughing the first time we heard it. We hope you guys enjoyed it.
What a tune. If you can pick out what it's from, we'll send you a Rod the Podcast hat to the first person.
That's a great idea.
First person that can pick
Hit us
out
up
where
on
the
Twitter
tune
and let
is
us
from.
know where it's from. Yep.
We'll send you a Rod the Podcast hat.
Okay, as the jingle mentioned, it's Turtleneck Time. So we're gonna sit in the big boy chair and play Don Waddell, coming off maybe the most alpha male move probably in his tenure as a GM in the NHL, with the offer sheet of KK and subsequent, his lines, mimicking Bergevin and all that stuff. It's great. We rehashed it all last week. But now as you look at your roster and you feel like you've probably solidified your top 9, I think step one in this conversation is we have to talk about what the Canes need to do to maximize their investment in KK. And for me, it's how are they going to develop him? Mike, you're Don Waddell. You've already said you're going to start him on the wing. What's that look like to you?
So the first thing to developing him is having cap space, right? To actually play him. And that is kind of the first step, is putting Jake Gardner on LTIR.
Great point. We did mention that earlier.
Yep. So he's going to have hip and back surgery and is going to be out for the season. That frees up that cap space. That solves that problem. So we're not in a cap situation as a result of the signing. If I'm Don Waddell and I'm taking part in roster conversations with Rod Brendamore and Tom Dundon, and you're talking about where is he going to maximize his potential, I think you'd love to see him on the left wing with Trocheck and Natchez, right? That's where he's going to have the most offensive upside. Now, letting Stahl guide him and maybe show him the ropes a little bit in a different setting and say, hey, you go do you on offense. I'm going to anchor you. We're going to make sure we play smart. It's a good chance he starts out on that left wing with Stahl and Jesper Fast. And you're not going to get the offensive production, which is where I'm kind of hot and cold on it, because you took him from Montreal where he was throwing on 56 different line combinations or whatever that number was in his career. Didn't really play with elite offensive talent very often, and you have an opportunity to play him with 2 elite offensive talents in Trocheck and Natchez. So I would like to see that, but he's going to have to earn that. It's not going to be handed to him. We've seen that with how Roddy develops players, with Aho, with Natchez, with Svetch. It's all been consistent in that way, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a terrific point, because I think that's something that makes Carolina unique, and guys respect Rod because, one, he's been there and done everything in the league. He's played every role. He's been the first line center captain, and he's been a fourth liner. So guys respect that, and his voice obviously carries a ton of weight in the room, not just for the success he has as a player, but obviously now what he's done as a coach. However, sitting here as I'm now currently Don Waddell, I think my pitch to Rod would be, we know KK, if Montreal did one thing right with his development, is they forced him to learn the game defensively. The metrics show that he is a competent, above average defensive forward. I think that was kind of that's the difference between Svetch, Aho, and Natchez. They were so offensive forward, and they needed to learn, the other side of the game. So if I'm sitting here and I'm Don and I'm going to Rod, it's like, hey, we've made this investment in this guy. I think the best thing for his development is we got to unlock his offensive potential. And I'm not sure we do that by, I'm not going to say anchoring, but anchoring him with Stahl. But by playing him with Jordan Stahl, that is going to be a defensive-minded line, a shutdown line. It's also going to have you going against a lot of top pairing lines, especially at home when you have second change. So maybe play him on the second line. Heck, maybe you even have him with Aho and Turbo at times.
Yeah.
Because I think, to me, the top 6, Svetch, Aho, Turbo, KK, Trocheck, Natchez, those 6 represent a different talent level. Nino, Stahl, Fast can give you necessary secondary scoring, but if this team's going to hit its potential and be a win now team and maximize their investment in KK, you can't just stick him in a defensive role. Unlike those other guys, as I mentioned, we know he can do this. We now need to see the confidence in his game, the skill, and playing with other light-minded, talented players.
Absolutely. I think throughout the season, we'll see him on the top 3 lines. I think there's no doubt about that. Just when things don't go well and Rod likes to shuffle the deck every now and then, I could definitely see those flips being made. I just like you said, and like we both mentioned, you want to see him play with the offensive skill. With that being said, if Stahl is up against the offensive matchup, then maybe their defensive metrics are a little bit lower. So he might be able to find better matchups when he's in the offensive zone playing against those lines. It's not always true, but it can be true. So there will be scenarios where he'll probably be against lesser defensive talent as a result. So it's interesting. And when you dissect it and look at the lineup, I think you can see a lot of fluctuation between the top 2 lines depending on if things are going or not. And I think you can even see a little bit of that bleed into the 3rd line. I think Stahl and Foster are going to be together a lot. I don't really see that changing too much unless Foss is not playing well and Martinook's playing well or something along those lines. There's flexibility in the roster. There's a lot of talent in the roster. But on the Kotkaniemi topic, I really do want to see him playing with Trocheck and H's. I think you at least have to give him 10 to 12 games there, I would think, to start the season and see if he's able to elevate his game. Those guys are going to give him the opportunity. And then you have potentially 2 offensive lines that are excelling. So,
another thing that the Rod we know really enjoys is having multiple guys on a line that can take faceoffs.
Yep.
And that's why I think slotting KK with Trocheck just makes so much sense.
All 3 of them can.
All 3 can take faceoffs, but
much.
He's the lefty.
Yep.
No, because Trocheck and Natchez are righties. He's the lefty there. I think on the 3rd line, that's less of an issue because Stahl is such a face-off ace that, not that Trocheck is not, but Stahl, he's on a different level. But to me, that subtle element that he can be your, power side lefty face-off guy with that line to get possession is huge. I would love to see him get a ton of offensive zone starts. It's almost like you need to put him in a position to, an incubator. We're going to facilitate offensive opportunities for you. And so I wouldn't be shocked, like I said, if he does play on the top line and have an all Finn line. Just opportunities to make him feel comfortable here.
Yeah.
Because if he clicks, if he becomes the guy that was drafted 3rd overall, well, not only do you have a core member, but this team is now elevated to a completely different level.
For sure.
And if I'm Don, these are like the small nuanced things that I'm talking to Rod about in hopes that, hey, when we built this team, we provide you with the things you ask for. Well, this was our vision for it too. And I think they do a great job of collaborating. So I'm sure they're having these discussions. And, I, as Don Waddell, obviously wanted to bring KK in. Tom Dundon obviously played a huge role in it, but it was not merely to, get back at Montreal. This was a hockey move. And I think to maximize the player, these are the things that the team needs to do.
For sure. I think the top line for me is a little bit tougher just because I think Svetch has earned that spot. And I think the 8-year contract makes it even more important that he's put his faith in the organization. I mean, I think it's a super team-friendly deal. I mean, number one, you got term, and you got a AAV below $8 million, so they're gonna have
Mike, that was some of your. I mean, Don, that was some of your best work.
Absolutely. And so I think that they're gonna have a very strong. I don't even know how to really word it, but I just can't see them going away from Svetch on the top line very frequently. They're gonna feel like they owe it to him somewhat. A little, you trust me, I'll trust you situation, maybe.
Sure, and as much as I've kind of paired this conversation that they need to do everything to get KK going, well, maybe more importantly is making sure Svetch gets back on the superstar trajectory. Because I don't think anybody doubts that Svech has the highest ceiling on the team. And the thing that I've struggled with in the past is he's kind of been the guy that they've yo-yoed a little bit. You know, there's rumors he was frustrated playing with Stahl. He wants to play with Aho and Turbo.
Yeah, let him.
I think you just got to unleash him now. And I think you feel good enough about your top 9 where you got to plug and play him with your best players. Because honestly, as much as we're talking about KK, Svech making the jump is the transcendent aspect of this team.
Absolutely.
If he becomes one of the top, 5 to 10 wingers in the league, now you are a Stanley Cup contender.
Absolutely.
If he jumps in the top 5, okay. If he pots 40 and has a 90-point season, we're talking about something completely different here. And he has that ability to do it. So as much as we've focused this conversation on the development of Kotkaniemi, we got to remember that they have other players like Svech and Necas, and heck, Aho and Turbo are still young as well. More so Aho, of course, but these are all guys that are still developing. And I think the beauty of the addition of KK is that now your core can all grow together. They play similar styles, and now you just have your vision. And I think Mike/Don, you've done a wonderful job in doing that. As much of a hard time as I know I've given the organization for some of the decisions, now I can see the vision, and I like where it's at because I think it can win short and long term.
Absolutely. And I mean, just to touch on some of the points you made, like your first line, Turbo is good at everything. Like the dude could play defense in the NHL probably, right? And he can take faceoffs. So you have Aho and Turbo that both can take faceoffs there. Kotkaniemi, Trocheck, Necas all can take faceoffs, right? Stahl, like you said, he's going to anchor that line. You don't need another faceoff guy. And then your fourth line is literally pretty much all centers. If you play Lorentz, Stepan, and Martinuk, all 3 of those guys can take faceoffs. I'm not totally sure about Levo, but I don't think he fits that bill as much. But I might be wrong. But I mean, you look at a team that you got centers everywhere. You've got high skill players, people that are starting to reach their peak or are in the prime development stage, right? And then you got guys that are already there. You got Trocheck, who's already there. You've got Turbo, who's already probably at his peak. I mean, Stahl is probably coming down towards probably
you just need Stahl,
less productive.
Not even to sustain what he did last year, but to not fall off drastically.
If he sniffs last year, that's massive. So I look at it and I think, yes, there are question marks, but there is a lot of potential. And we haven't even started to talk about the defense really yet.
You want to go there now?
Yeah, we might as well.
So I think we're fairly confident that it'll be Slavin D'Angelo, with D'Angelo being the pseudo-Hamilton replacement. And we've talked about if D'Angelo can provide 80% of the offense that Dougie did, which we think is a very plausible number, and not be a liability on defense. I know he grades out analytically as a significantly worse defender than Dougie Hamilton. I think Jacob Slavin can augment a lot of that.
Probably.
He just needs to be average. And we know what we're going to get out of the Brady Shea, Brett Pesce pairing. I wouldn't break them up. I'd be too concerned about playing Shea with D'Angelo or Bear. I'd leave those 2 together. You have 2 lockdown defensemen, Slavin on the first pair, Pesce on the second pair, and I really liked how Shea developed in his first full season with the team a year ago. And then the third pairing, Ian Cole and Ethan Bear, I think we feel is a dramatic upgrade to what they had last year. And that, not really a slight to Jake Bean or the plethora of other guys that got minutes on that third pairing, but it's just these 2 guys should be solid, and Bear especially has the upside to grow into even more as a young right shot D-man. Any additional thoughts there? Because I think we feel pretty good about this group as a whole. And obviously Dougie's a big subtraction, but I think it's more balanced pairings 1 through 3.
Absolutely. This team is going to play fast offensive hockey. That's what they're built to do. They're going to defend well, but they're going to have their whole system built around pressure and scoring, and they have the players to do it, right? You can you can expect guys like Natchez and guys like Svech to take a step forward next year. I think that's a fair assumption. I think they're both at that point in their career. And you look at the defensive side, and if we're just going to talk hockey, D'Angelo has the biggest point to prove in the NHL probably. You have two guys with Kotkaniemi and D'Angelo that have massive statements to make on the ice, right? Kotkaniemi wants to prove he's not a bust. D'Angelo wants to prove that he's a good hockey player that's got his crap together. You got guys that have stuff to prove, and that matters. And then you surround that with talent. You surround it with three good defensive pairings, and you put Anderson and Ranta, and if they can get towards the peak of their performance, then you have two really good goalies. They stay healthy, you probably wash out there, right? So
yeah, I think it's inevitable, and we mentioned this after they signed Anderson that and Ranta, even though we liked that move and felt like the goalie position was an upgrade, in all likelihood, the goalie numbers are going to regress. Last year was kind of an outlier season. Not that we didn't believe in Ned or Peter or Reimer and what those guys produced. I think it's probably an outlier season as far as like expected goals, saves above expected, things of that nature. But for me, the goalie position is not so much about game 1 through 82. It's about what happens after
Absolutely.
that. And I know Frederick Anderson, struggled in the playoffs with Toronto, and that whole entire organization has been a dumpster fire when they've gotten to the playoffs. But I think we can feel confident that with the 6 guys in front of him, and if he goes down or doesn't play well, Antti Ranta's been elite in spurts. He just can't stay healthy. But with those 6 guys in front of the 2 veteran goalies they have now,
5 guys.
What?
5 guys in front of him, right?
Oh no, I was referring to the 6 defensemen.
Oh, okay. I was
sorry. No,
I was
you're
just
good.
like, you're talking,
Yeah,
you're talking
I know there's
5
5 guys on the ice. I'm just talking about the 6.
Got it.
D-men playing. I was
losing you there.
You're flashing me a 5. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Wait,
Okay.
they don't play with 7 on the ice? No, the six defensemen
Got
in
it.
front of them.
Got it.
I think you have to feel extremely confident that this team is probably going to give up less grade A opportunities, play more solid, and to your point, play with a lot more speed. And I think that's going to translate up the ice to the forwards who, with the addition of KK, can play at an even faster tempo.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be an exceptionally fun team to watch. And I'm confident in the two-way ability of the forward group as well. They're just so deep, 1 through 12. That top 9, I'd patch it up with anybody. And if the first line develops, continues to grow, especially if Svech makes the jump to the elite category, I think that could go from a borderline top 10 line to one of the best in the entire league.
For sure.
We have a lot to look forward to. I'm being a little more positive tonight. I'm pretty fired up about the signing because I just believe in investing in good young players.
For sure. And we'll have to I've heard so much about Kotkaniemi's skating and the fact that it needs to improve, and it's kind of been like one of his biggest knocks, and I'm curious to see him live and to see what it actually looks like. If it's his edge work, is it his top end speed? So I'm curious to see what that looks like and if it's a restriction to his game at all or anything. So we'll just have to wait for training camp and preseason and all that to kind of get a visual on that, to see what that looks like. And then, like you said, obviously we can be cautiously optimistic about this lineup because we know that at the end of the day, the trade deadline is still around. There will be opportunities to add if necessary. Has the organization made some very aggressive statements with their player management? For sure. And they're going to have to prove it. And we're going to have to see what happens with the product on the ice. They've made aggressive statements, And
we haven't liked everything.
Yeah, and it's polarizing, and people around the league think we've made a ton of terrible decisions, right? So we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, one thing that I'll say is we kind of wane out here of Turtleneck Time. The Canes moves, and I know I referenced this earlier, don't exist in a vacuum. It's all within the lexicon of team building. And I think that's why it's really easy to overreact to one move, because as you said, that can be polarizing or divisive, trading Ned, etc. Well, now as we, have the ability of hindsight and we can look back over the past couple months and all the things we've talked about, I think we feel better sitting here than we did a month ago.
Yeah.
And so this will probably be our last Turtleneck Time until after training camp before the season begins. And we're kind of going to look to do it every 6 weeks or so. Probably look to do it after the season starts, Halloween, first of the year, and then right before the trade deadline. I know you guys want to hear that jingle as many times as you can, but that's kind of our tentative plan for now.
Yep.
But unless you have any final thoughts, I think we'd like to jump into one final segment, which I think we've been talking about for a little bit, which I think would be pretty fun. What do you think?
Yeah, and if you're missing the jingle, just know that you can always go back to episode 11 and play it over and over again. So
that's why it's titled The Jingle, so
Absolutely.
You don't forget. Okay, so our last segment here tonight, just because it's the off season and things are probably going to calm down here for a little bit. And we only have one more episode before Mike has to take a little hiatus for an important event. Mike, let's talk about the Carolina Hurricanes, retired numbers, and any former Canes players that are potentially up for the distinction. Give me an overview of who has currently been retired, and then the candidates that we think could be up for nomination. We'll talk through those guys and we'll call it a night.
Who is currently retired and should be retired, or just who's retired?
Who is retired? We can go into that discussion a little later.
So we have Glenn Wesley retired, right?
Oh, that's the one you're starting with.
Yeah,
Number
we're just
2.
gonna start
Yep.
there, get it out of the way, move on from it. Ronnie Francis, Rob Brandemore.
So I think before we go into the potential future nominees, to me, and this is no slight to Glenn Wesley, I think, good player with the organization for a long time, super solid. I think it's a low bar for entry. I'm of the belief that franchise icons and guys that are potentially Hall of Fame players or Hall of Fame caliber players are ones that shouldn't exactly be like the echelon you have to be on. But in my mind, you need to be at the top of a lot of, organizational record books, having played a minimum of 10 years or so, I think is something you mentioned. I think that's a good point. I just think you need to associate the player with the team. You don't necessarily have to have won a cup, but you need to have been on a bunch of really good teams over an elongated period and been a premier player in the league. So Glenn Wesley checks boxes for a number of those categories. To me, I think it's being a premier player in the league and not necessarily being the point producer to stand out in like a team record book. Obviously an important cog to the organization, but I wouldn't necessarily have retired number 2. I think Ron Francis, all-time great, first captain, or not first captain, but first premier free agent signing for the team after they moved to Raleigh when he came back from the Penguins, obviously drafted by Hartford. What more do you need to say? Elite player, elite lettuce, guy's just a no-brainer, and one of the best guys in the history of the league, and captained the team to a Cup Finals appearance. Lastly, the namesake of our podcast, Rod Brandemore, Mr. Hurricane himself, number 17, and a guy we'll talk about in a little bit, Cam Ward. Sorry, but that should have been Rod's Conn Smythe, and that's just my opinion, and probably what's keeping him out of the Hall of Fame right now. But a guy that has 2 Selkies, captained the team to the Cup championship, special guy, universally respected, obvious no-brainer. Any other additions to those 3 guys? Additional comments?
No, I mean, how deep do we want to? How deep do we
I
want to
think
go? Right?
those guys are in.
Yeah.
You can maybe add. Would you add any additional stipulations to where your threshold for entry would be?
So the thing for me with it is obviously I'm not a huge fan of retiring numbers. Like I think it has to be a home run, no brainer. Because like you said, you can't get into the habit of just retiring a guy that was loyal to the franchise. Like,
yeah, I think if the question of should a number be retired even have like a semblance of doubt,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be a thing.
If it's not unanimous, then
Yes.
Then
You asked Johnny Canes fan in the stands, should we retire Mike May's number? And
maybe not all Canes fans. You can't. Maybe not everyone.
you know,
no, I know what you mean.
rational fans. You know, I know there's people that
shoot.
Yeah.
Shoot.
I've missed that PNC. I can't wait to get back here in a little over a month. But yeah, you make valid points about not asking maybe every. But all the listeners of the podcast, they tell you right.
Oh, if you're listening to the podcast, yeah, you already got an excellent hockey IQ.
So as we move away from the three gentlemen that are already retired, are there any names that stand out to you that you hear in discussion or that you would consider? Do you have a list?
I think there are two that can be considered. I don't think it necessarily means they should be, but I think it's worth the conversation, right? And if it's going off my metric of if it's even slightly in doubt, then don't do it. Then these guys probably wouldn't be in, but they're really, really close. One of them being really close, one of them being like a little bit closer. And we'll start with the closer one being probably Eric Stahl, in my opinion. 100-point scorer, right?
The year they won the cup, yep.
Yep. Wins the cup. Long-term captain. I mean, he went through
high
it
draft
all.
pick, homegrown.
Yeah, big time. And he's got the stats, right? He's got the pedigree. He had the loyalty piece, right? A part of me kind of wished we had made like a run to get him back and bring him in on like the fourth line or even maybe the third line, depending on how Rod wanted to utilize him. I love Eric. He was great for the franchise. The highs were awesome and the lows were the lows, but that's any organization. He's up there. I think you could make an argument for him, certainly. Another one being Cam Ward.
Yeah, to me, and just real quick,
Yeah.
Eric is a no doubter for me. A guy that was highly drafted, captain of the team, highest score on your cup champion, cup finals winning team. There were some dark years that the team faded under his captaincy. I know there are portions of the fan base that attribute that to him and his leadership. I think that was more organizational mismanagement. It feels like as time has elapsed, those feelings have abated a little bit. There was a strong push that people wanted Eric back for one final run at it.
Yeah.
I'm glad he got to another cup final, and obviously losing with Montreal to the Lightning. It's just kind of a no-brainer. He sits at a lot of your team record books, checks every box in my opinion. He probably will not get into the NHL Hall of Fame, but he's close enough to merit all-star status and a perennial elite player. To me, having 12 up in the rafters is a no-brainer when he's done.
Yep, for sure.
Who's the next guy?
I think he's got a good argument. The next guy would probably be Cam Ward that you'd consider. The longevity with the Hurricanes, the win totals, the Stanley Cup, the Conn Smythe. He's got a lot going for him in that regard. He had down years, but I mean, how good was the team in front of him when he had down years? So it's that part makes it tough, but there's no doubt that when you look at the numbers, he has numbers that you could make an argument for.
Sure. You touched on it. I think the argument with Cam Ward is, and although we kind of rebuffed this notion earlier, I think goalies are a little unique. His biggest calling card is longevity.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned, I don't think he should have won the Conn Smythe. I think that was more of a narrative-driven award that year. I think it should have gone to Roddy or, heck, maybe even Eric, but it's a different story. Rod should have that, but whatever, I digress.
Yeah.
There's just not a ton of goalies that have won 300 games with one franchise. And in those dark years, he actually had some really good years. I know there are people that blame him for the performance. And yeah, he was not great at all times. But when you have a guy that sticks around that long, and this is a point you made before we started recording, you just don't have a ton of goalies come along, especially with this franchise.
Yeah.
So he stands alone, more so than maybe any of the other guys. he is on such a different pedestal compared to his peers at the position that for being the Conn Smythe winner on a cup team, for winning 300 games, he's still around the team. I think Cam Ward probably gets in. And if we're being honest, Tom Dundon is never one to shy away from an opportunity to make a little money. I guarantee, on nights where you retire numbers, they're automatic sellouts. I think it's just a way to get good vibes and people in the building. Not that that's the reason why you should ever retire a number, but to me, he's on the periphery enough and he stands alone compared to his contemporaries at the position that he really is the only goalie in franchise history that merits any semblance of consideration. And for that, to me, he's in. Obviously not an NHL Hall of Famer, but a Canes Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and you can have the discussion, what does 318 wins as a goalie equate to in points, right? Is that 900 points? Like, what is it, 600 points? Like, how do you value goalie wins compared to goals and assists, right? Like, when you're looking at points totals for a player's career, like, where do you put 318 wins in that regard? He's a guy that, holds franchise records for what? Games played, wins, winning percentage, shutouts, saves. Like, he's got all of that.
There is no equal. Yeah.
So he's put separation in that regard, and where we kind of stray away from comparing him to Wesley, because we do think they're on a little bit of a different level in regard to, like, one being a goalie and then one being a defensive defenseman for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. And I understand rewarding tenure, and part of me wonders, was there a, hey, stay in Carolina, Glenn Wesley, and we'll retire your number when you're done? Like, because, it's just one of those ones that's a little bit odd. And maybe we're just missing.
Maybe we're a little young. I
was young. I was young when his career started. I mean, he was with Hartford before the Hurricanes. So,
Glenn, if you're listening, you want to come on the pod and defend yourself, I think we'd love it. But always here for the discussion, and maybe we can get educated a little bit. But
hard hitting journalism, right?
Absolutely. Here. Shoot your shot. Cam Ward, though, hey, no real equal. Another homegrown guy, first round pick, played his whole career here. I love how you equated wins and everything to points. I think it's just so far above and beyond that there is no equal. And for me, that kind of just does it. And you might have one, if you're lucky, have one goalie every decade. I mean, this franchise has been around over 25 years now, and there's only one. So if you're retiring one goalie number every quarter century, that's not going to be too many. And I think you'd be lucky to do that. Yep. Any other names on your list that you would consider? I know people want to talk. For me, I'll quickly dismiss one. I obviously ambassador for the team, had some great moments, but too injury plagued. To me, that's Eric Cole. I don't even think it's up for debate. That doesn't mean he's not a Canes legend or anything. It's just the injuries, to me. So I think the last name on my list, and you may have more, is the captain, Justin Williams, the guy to use your word, galvanized the team upon his return. Obviously scores the empty netter in 2006 to clinch the finals for the Canes. A guy that has, 3 Stanley Cup rings, a Conn Smythe, is known as Mr. Game 7. Fortunately, a lot of these accolades occurred outside of Carolina.
Yeah, that's the biggest knock.
Doesn't have the point totals to, despite the outstanding playoff performance, doesn't have the point totals to necessitate a Hall of Fame bid as a player in his own right. To me, he's Hall of Very Good, and just because there were so many teams involved, spends a large part of his career in LA and a handful of others. He's a Canes legend, and he was this era's Rod Brindamore. He brought a mindset and leadership to the room on a team that was kind of rudderless.
Yeah, culture
changer. And I don't think you can understate those guys. And maybe that's the intrinsic value that hey, Tom Dundon's the owner. He knows Justin Williams is beloved. They wanted to bring him back. He's special. And maybe that's something that transcends the record book and what could get him lifted to the rafters. I think another funny thing is, which number would you put up there?
Yeah.
But to me, I think it's just another guy that obviously deserves, multiple pages in the history of the Carolina Hurricanes book, if, to use that metaphor, if one of those existed, but not a guy that we're probably going to see 11 or 14 in the rafters at PNC.
No, and we love him. Like, he is an all-time great in just the way he approaches life and the game, and he's charismatic, and he just, he carries himself the right way. He's got the it factor. And the biggest knock on retiring his number would probably be tenure for me, right, with the Canes.
Yeah, he's the opposite of kind of the other guys we've talked about. Yeah,
so he's a guy where if he had spent all or most of his career with the Hurricanes, I don't even think you question. I think he's
like,
a
even
no-brainer.
like, take out the LA, say he, instead of going to LA, he's in Carolina his entire career. No-brainer.
Yeah.
And
no-brainer.
Even with the one cup, and that's it. He is that special of a person to this franchise. Just in juxtaposition to Wesley or Cam Ward, the lack of longevity hurts his candidacy.
Absolutely. And I believe that you can add to tenure by being involved in the organization post playing career. So it's not a door I would close as he's involved with the Hurricanes. Let's see how that role progresses and how active that role is. It might just be one of those titles that's hey, we don't have salary cap space, so we're just going to hire you to this role, right?
Yeah,
post-playing.
Mike, I think that's terrific, because I just think that makes a ton of sense. Although he didn't have the longevity on the ice with the team that would merit, such a distinction, he can make that up in another. And I don't think I've ever framed it that way or considered it. But as with Brind'Amour, I think when people outside of this era in this market think of the Carolina Hurricanes, there's two players that are synonymous with the team. And that's Rod Brind'Amour and Justin Williams. He embodies everything that this organization stands for. He wants to be a Hurricane. He's back with the organization in some capacity. I don't think it happens, but if there was a way to, manipulate the system and find a loophole, maybe it is service to the organization. You retire him as a player, but it's not just your performance, it's the contributions to the franchise. And hey, I think we need to run this up the flagpole to Tom Dundon and make this one happen.
Yeah, for sure. We got to get Tom Dundon on the phone.
I don't know. We've kind of been, I've been kind of harsh.
Yeah, I think he's all right with that.
I think I hope he'd respect it. I mean,
I think he would. I don't think he's soft.
No, he's definitely not soft. Man to man, he's a guy that I have no doubt.
That interview might be a little intimidating, honestly.
Yeah, maybe I'm kind of soft. But yeah, as we said about Glenn Wesley, Tom Dundon, if you're listening, come on the podcast.
And when we called you Jerry Jones, we meant it from a loving place. We meant that
lovingly.
Absolutely.
Ever since
it's the Billionaire Boy Club.
Ever since episode 8, where I leaned in on the organization, I've been very pro. We've been on a strict upward trajectory, and hey, we promise not to be mouthpieces for the team, but when they're doing things we like, we're going to say that too.
Yep.
So, Mike, any last words? Any other players you'd like to add?
I think
that's a good,
that's
fun
a good list. Yeah.
Off-season discussion, and enjoyed breaking down the KK offer sheet, giving our final thoughts. Turtleneck Time with the outstanding jingle, and then talking Canes retired numbers with you guys. Appreciate you sticking with us. Mike, tell them how they can keep up with the podcast.
Make sure to click those bell notifications on whatever you are listening on right now, so that every time an episode comes out, you get notified and it pops up on your homepage. As always, thanks for tuning in, and be on the lookout for more Canes content.